Starting the recording. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon for some of you. Thank you very much for joining. I understand that there has been a bit of an issue with the link to join. There was a broken connection, so thank you for your patience and for trying again with the new link that was shared afterwards. And I do hope that other colleagues will also be able to overcome this little obstacle that we had at the start of our week. Thank you very much for joining today. I know that also this is a different time slot than the one we normally use. But we have a very interesting session ahead of us. It's going to be split into 2 lectures, one today and one on Thursday, same time, so 12 noon. So keep an eye out for the upcoming notifications so that you can also join the second part of the session that we're starting today. I'm very happy to be joined today by our colleague Mariano Brenner, who will be taking the lead on this session and the next. Mariano is the regional coordinator for the Americas and the Portuguese-speaking countries at the International Social Security Association, which is a name that you have heard already as part of the, let's say, the development of the course curriculum in the past few editions, and we're very happy to be able to collaborate with ISA again, and with you specifically, Mariano. It's a pleasure to have you on board. I'll pass you the floor right away in just a moment. Maybe just a very quick housekeeping announcement. So as usual, the session is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the eCampus as soon as possible after the end of the session. I know most of you are already veterans of how the ITC courses work, and we want to keep the sessions as interactive and as engaging as possible. So please feel free to share your comments, your reflections. If you have any questions as well, share them either in the chat box or by raising your hands. I think we will stop at some point during the session to see if there are questions that need to be addressed, and if not, at the end of the presentation, we can have some time dedicated to Q&A. But if you want to keep track of your thoughts, just feel free to put them in the chat and we can pick them up from there. With that being said, Mariano, once again, thank you very much for joining, and over to you.
Okay, hello everybody. I see that we're slowly populating the room. Welcome. My name, as Michela said, is Mariano Brenner. I am the regional coordinator for the Americas and Portuguese speaking at the International Social Security Association. And before joining the International Social Security Association, which is also called ISA, I worked for the Ministry of Labor, Employment, and Social Security in Argentina, where I was the lead negotiator for these international social security agreements. I don't know if you've heard much about the association. The association where I work is based in Geneva. It has 97 years old, and it's the leading organization around the world for social security institutions and organizations that are linked to social security. And what we try to do, we try to work on improving the administration of social security. We have 336 member organizations that are members of the ISA in 162 countries. Something that I wanted to ask you before we start, and while I'm looking for my PowerPoint, is that anytime that you have a question, anytime that you need something, please raise your hand. And let's try to be as interactive as possible. So this is fun for all of us. It's very late for some of you. It's very early for me too. Here, I'm in Argentina. So let's try to make it as fun as possible, as dynamic as possible. And feel free to ask anytime that you have a question. So with that being said, I'm just gonna share my screen. Can you see it okay? Okay, good. So we're gonna start with some interaction. I wanted to ask all of you if you know, or why do you think that social security agreements are important? What issues could they help solve for migrant workers? Do we have any takers for the question? Michaela, you're gonna have to help me with
No worries, I can Absolutely, I
I
can
can-
help you with the raise hand in the chat. We don't have any volunteers yet to break the ice, but it's an
Okay.
introduction, so don't feel the pressure of having to necessarily come up with the correct answer, but it's just a bit of a brainstorming to begin with. Ida, over to you.
All right. Can you all hear me?
There,
Yes.
can you try again? We can hear you, but a little bit far away.
All right. And how about now?
It's a little bit better. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. So like just to break the ice, for me, I think social security agreements are really important in that they actually enable migrants to transfer their social security benefits in periods whereby they want to return to their countries of origin. So this actually can enhance their social and professional reintegration back home. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? There's no right or wrong answer. This is just to get an idea of how much you know and how involved have you ever been with this type of agreement. So don't be afraid to respond.
There's one comment from Victor in the chat. Victor, would you like to take the floor and tell us a little bit more?
I thought that was enough, but I was likening it using an analogy like when you are a driver, in order to drive around, you need a permit or a license. So it is like a license to authorizing you that you can drive around. Of course, there can be accidents, there can be other issues, but at least you have a license. That's how I see it.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any other responses? One more, and then we can move up to the second question.
Nicoletta,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, thank you to give me the floor. I am Nicoletta from Cameroon, ILO. I am social protection expert. I think that agreements are very important because agreements are the document that are elaborated to respect the right of everybody, everyone elsewhere. These people can be in the world, and in respect to the international, regional, and country law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the responses. We will be solving this question today and Thursday. So thank you for your responses. Now, I have another question for you. We know, or we will know, that there's not established social security agreement that works for world around. So I wanted to ask you if you had any ideas or can imagine what countries are the countries with the most agreements. Anybody can think of a country or name your own country if you want to see whether it is the one with the most agreements. No? Okay, I can tell you, I'm from Argentina, and Argentina is not the country with the most agreements. But I can give you a hint. The country with the most agreements is not in Asia and is not in Africa. Any takers for the question? Michela, do you want to risk it?
Yeah, I don't know. I come from Italy, but I also don't think that Italy takes the ticket in this case.
It's not Italy. Anybody else? France.
Shy audience today. France is
No, they're saying France.
okay, in the chat.
Yeah, in the
I
chat.
can
But
see now,
no,
yes.
it's not France. It's in the Americas.
Okay. I think The suspense is killing us. I think you have to tell us now. Which
The
country is
country
it?
with the most agreements is Canada. It has 59 agreements signed, and then it's followed by Korea. So we move to a different continent that has 39 agreements signed. And then in the third position, the response was correct, is France with 37 agreements signed. So this was just to do a little bit of a brief introduction into the topic. So according to the ILO and to the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, there's about 169 million migrant workers globally. Now, do you know how to classify these migrants? What are the different classifications that we can use for these types of migrants? I'll start. We can say skilled migrants and unskilled or low-skilled migrants. Anybody that can suggest another classification? No, another can be permanent or seasonal workers. Still nobody? We can talk about, let's see, there's someone in the chat. High skilled and low skilled, that's correct. Anybody else?
I
Temporary.
am capturing the words that you say in the chat, so participants can
Okay.
also have keep track of the different categories that we've explored.
Good. We can also talk about cross-border and long-distance migrants. And then another one that is very relevant to these types of agreements that we will be talking about today is formal workers or informal workers. And why this is important? Because everything that we will be talking about today is going to be related to formal workers only. So everything that we will be discussing today will relate to formal migrants. And there's different types of migrants. We have people that migrate for different reasons. People that migrate when they're retired because they want to live closer to the sun or in a cheaper country, or they want to reunite with their families. We have people that move because they're looking for better opportunities. We have people that move because they just are nomads and they like moving from one place to the other. There's different types of migration. We have people moving because of climate issues. We have people moving because of wars. They have different kinds of people that move for different reasons. The idea is that these agreements can cover all of them as long as they are formal workers in the country of origin and in the country of destination. Now, there's very little data about migrant workers. There's not a lot of data that we can get on what type of work they do, how long they're there for, what is the main reason for migration. And this is because there's many sources that we need to look into to get this information, because there's a lot of lack of standardized definitions, because there's a lot of issues with data privacy and security, and because there's a lot of migration that is undocumented or informal, and therefore it's difficult to track. Now, regarding the age, I don't know if you've seen this, but 86.5% of the people that are migrant workers are between 25 and 64 years old. And then 66% of these migrant workers migrate to high-income countries. We will see that in the next slide. And 66% are women workers, and they work in the services industry. Let's see, this is not moving to the next slide. There we go. So the distribution of migrants by region, according to the last source that I was able to find, that is from 2019. It's the source of the ILO in 2021, but the data originates from a survey in 2019. And most of the migrants migrate to Europe and Central Asia. Then it's second by Americas, and then the Arab states. This is what I was referring to when I was speaking about the amount of migration from one country to the other. Now, there's different ways to protect migrant workers and their families. There's three that I'm going to be referring to. What do you think the one relates to? Anybody that has an idea?
Unilateral.
Exactly, unilateral. And what is it? What does that mean? What is a unilateral measure to protect migrant workers? Or what could be an example, for example?
The measures, the laws that a particular country put in place for its migrants, for its citizens or its migrants.
Mm-hmm. And can you think of an example that comes to mind?
What are you asking, please?
Can you think of an example of these unilateral measures that are applied by one country for its migrants?
Yeah, social protection laws.
Okay. Someone is saying equality of rights. Yes, equality of rights, it's true, but it applies to all three types. So I was looking more for an example of one that would be only a unilateral. So I'll give you one and see if you come up with a different one. When a country allows migrant workers to contribute towards their pension, to voluntarily contribute towards their pension, even when they work abroad, this is a way that a country can be doing a unilateral measure to protect migrant workers. So for example, I'll give you an example. Someone that comes from Italy and moves to Argentina. He or she can continue to contribute towards their pension in Italy, despite not being in Italy. So if and when this person returns to Italy, they get a full pension when they reach the age of retirement. Anybody else? Any other ideas? No? Okay.
Am I repeating what you said? Their pensions can be transferred back to their country when they retire, or if they have worked in different countries, or if they have the agreement, they can get back what they have worked for, their remittances, their pensions back in their country. I don't know if that's what you have said.
No, that is correct, but that would be a bilateral measure. It wouldn't be a unilateral measure.
That is bilateral, yeah.
Unilateral would be when someone is just one country doing it. It's a decision of one country. So for example, another unilateral measure that a country can take is to prepare their migrants to migrate. So they help them with their process of migration or with their process of return to the country. Now, the shaking hands, you already said it very correctly.
Yes, preparing them with the skills, so that they will be ready to either migrate to another country. Preparing them with skills, with language. Language and skills preparation is another unilateral measure. Yes. You've just given me more insights.
Now, when we talk about the bilateral ones, we also talk about two countries that will be negotiating some sort of agreement. We are yet to see what type of agreement this will be, but they would be in agreement to help migrant workers and their families if and when they move from one country to the other. And then what do you think is the big hands, the group of hands that are making a circle?
That's multilateral, surely.
Exactly. That's multilateral. And what do you think could be a multilateral measure to protect for social protection for migrant workers and their families?
It's a triangular or more, two or more countries agreeing on certain principles, certain laws, certain what they can do within their countries, within the corridors, and either in the country of origin or in the country of destination. What they can do, what they cannot do, what they can discuss, what they can negotiate, all of that.
Okay, good. Yes. When we talk about multilateral, we usually refer to the multilateral agreements that we will be seeing today. And something that is important is that there's not, before I was saying that there's not a lot of data on migration, on this type of migration, and there's even less data on how much the social protection measures impact on these types of migration. But the countries continue to do it because there is an understanding that first it helps, and also there is some sort of influence on migration if the people that are migrating or returning home can have some sort of social protection. I think there's someone. Okay, no. Someone just saying that the network will drop. So moving to the next slide. This is the amount of social security agreements around the world. And you see the red line that it's increasing. So in the 60s, we're talking about roughly 10, 15, 20 agreements, and then it goes up, 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 up. And when we reach 2020, we're talking about 660 agreements. Now, a chance to respond. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we have so many more agreements in 2020? What is the reason behind it?
Is it because 2019 was the centenary anniversary? Is it because of that? Could that be one of the reasons?
No, I don't think so.
May I take a guess?
Yes.
Could it also have been because of the crisis that we experienced, the health pandemics, and people had seen the need to sort of enhance these social security benefits?
No, actually, the pandemic was a little bit of a hold to the agreements because the people were not able to move, and people were more focused on more of the internal situation than on the international situation. So no, I wouldn't say that. But let's think. What have you seen in the world? What has happened in the world between 1960 and 2020? What has changed?
Sorry for jumping in. I just don't know how to
Yeah.
raise my hand.
It's okay.
Maybe because like COVID exposed, let's say, more vulnerabilities. I mean, it's not about just for the movement of people, but we saw many vulnerabilities, and countries, they decided to protect more, like focus on social protection, if I could guess.
Yeah, that's true. But again, that's more to the internal side of the country. So it was the social protection gaps that they discovered that were mostly within their own legislations. So they didn't need the social security agreements between countries. So keep in mind that we're talking about social security agreements that were signed between two countries or more countries. So why do you think two countries would agree to sign an agreement? Why would they decide to sign more agreements? What would be the reason behind it?
You were asking about a lot of what has happened between 1960 and ETA to now. A lot has happened. We've had a lot of, there are many trends, globalization. Okay, I see you nodding your head. Yes, apart from globalization, digitalization, exchange of workforce, movement of exchanging workforce from one country, the need for more workforce from one country to another, a lot of other factors. There's climate change and all of that.
It's exactly that. That's the reason why we're now living in a globalized world. People can migrate a lot easier than they used to be. People, in fact, migrate a lot. There's people that move from one place to the other. There's people that change countries often. So this is the reason behind this gigantic increase on the amount of social security agreements that we see from 1960 to 2020. Now, I wanted to show you the difference within the continents, who has signed more agreements with the passing of time. So now you can see we're talking about a total of approximately 627 agreements. And then out of these 627, 526 have Europe as one of the parties involved. Then Europe is seconded by the Americas with 214, then Asia and the Pacific, and then Africa. And again, why do you think Europe is the one with the most agreements? No, it's a tricky question.
Could it be that among many reasons, or some of the reasons, Europe is lacking workforce and they need manpower, workforce, and they are having a lot of age, the society is aging. Could be one of the reasons, and they need a lot of youth or manpower, workforce in their respective countries. That could be one of the reasons, obviously.
Yeah, that could be one of the reasons. And then to incentivize people coming, they sign an agreement so that people can have social security in both countries, in the country of origin and the country of destination. I see someone is saying the creation of the European Union. Yes, that's true. The European Union has an agreement that links all the countries, and also a few countries that are not part of the European Union. Anybody else? No, the other reason behind it is also that Europe has one of the most ancient and developed social security systems. So Europe has started doing this. If you see in the chart, you will see that Europe has been the highest since the very beginning. And it's because it has one of the oldest and more developed social security systems. So let's move to the next slide. What I wanted to show you here is we did a survey here in the ISA. And what we asked the countries is whether they had an agreement, yes or no, if this agreement was a bilateral agreement or a multilateral agreement, and then if they didn't have any agreements. Now, in Africa, we asked 33 countries. You'll see it on the chart below. Out of these 33 countries, 11 had both bilateral and multilateral agreements. 11 also had bilateral agreements only, and 11 had multilateral agreements only. And there were 21 countries that didn't have any agreement. In the Americas, we asked 36 countries. Out of these 36, 18 had both bilateral and multilateral agreements. 12 had only bilateral agreements, and 6 had only multilateral agreements, and there were only 5 that had no agreements whatsoever. In Asia and the Pacific, we asked 22 countries. There were none that had both bilateral and multilateral agreements. There were 13 that had bilateral agreements, 9 that had multilateral agreements, and there were 29 with no agreements. And in Europe, out of 57 countries, there were 41 that had both bilateral and multilateral agreements. There were 13 that had bilateral agreements only, and there were 9 that had multilateral. There were 3 that had multilateral agreements only, and there were no countries with no agreements. And this is what you see in the charts on top, in the pie charts on top, is the responses of Africa, the Americas, Asia and the Pacific, and Europe. Now, we talked about the reasons behind this, and we talked about the migration waves, the level of development of the social security systems, and also the intention to encourage migrant workers from one country to the other. Now, my question to you is, if you were a policymaker, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, so before you are afraid of responding, I'm telling you there's no right or wrong answer to this. If you were a policymaker in your country of origin, what country or countries would you like to negotiate an agreement with, and why? Anybody that dares to respond?
Yeah,
Nicoleta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you. In my country, regarding the statistics, Cameroonian immigrate a lot to Canada. I think that it is very important that my country put in place multilateral or bilateral agreement with this country, Canada, between Cameroon. Yes.
Okay, that's great. There was somebody else that wanted to respond?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I will look at it from regional point of view. I see myself as a global citizen, especially West Africa. A lot of our young people, especially young girls, migrate to the Arab states for work, mainly domestic work, and the harrowing stories we hear sometimes are not encouraging. So it would be nice that our sub-region, collectively, I would say ECOWAS, have a common agreement with these Arab states in order to augment or ameliorate or even better the conditions or the despicable stories we hear. So it would be nice that they have not just, I mean, that is just one example of the Arab states or the Middle East, so that West Africa as a region, whether Anglophone or Francophone, can have an understanding or an agreement, multilateral agreement with the Arab state, the whole of the Arab region, the Arab world. I would really encourage that, my way of thinking.
Okay, great. I see 2 other hands that are raised.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Please, Mesfin,
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in the context of Ethiopia, for example, majority of our youth migrate to the Kingdom of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the majority of them are not highly skilled, and migration looks like an irregular migration. And so in our context, to make this migration more safe, orderly and regular, we need to negotiate with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and currently the youth the literacy level of the country is increasing, and a lot of users are emerging with highly skilled. So now we are looking for an option in the other areas like Europe. Those who are in demand of highly skilled workers. So we have to again negotiate and align our policy with that country, and this will help us to minimize the number of unemployment in Ethiopia. We do have more than 10 million unemployed youth in Ethiopia. So negotiating with Europe, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and probably the others will helpful. So we should have to put in consideration many things while we are negotiating. One is the route corridors of our migration is very important. The entry points and the destination countries are very important while we are negotiating in the policy making. So these all are important for me.
Good, and it's true because social security agreements can also help incentivize the formalization of people. Because what I've seen in the past is that when there is no social security agreements between two countries, people just migrate and say that I'm not going to receive any benefit, which is incorrect. But in any case, they feel that they will not receive any benefits from being formalized in the other country. So they choose or they accept not to be formalized. Having a social security agreement can be a great incentive to push people to actually push for formalization in their employments. And I see one more hand that is raised from Magda.
Oh, thank you.
It's someone else before me? No.
No,
Go
no,
on,
it's you.
then I'll come after you. Go ahead.
Okay,
I'll come after you.
Thank you. Sorry, it's more like a question, but maybe we will address this later. In Greece, for example, we do have many migrants, and Greece has some agreements with countries like, for example, Egypt. But what about people like we have a big majority of refugees that are coming from, let's say, Syria or Middle East. And for those people, they're a bit unprotected because they don't have the protection of their countries because they flee for persecution. So that means that they can work they don't come in Greece, to find a job, but eventually they would like to start their life. So then they work for a small period in Greece, then they might migrate in another European country as they have the right to do so. So my question is how those people can actually have social protection, even from the previous years from their countries, or like remain this from Greece and then move in another country if they wish to, and they, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Magda, just to quickly respond to your question before we move to the next hand that is raised, there's two things. One is the relationship between Europe as a whole or Greece with the country of origin, like you were saying, people that migrate from any country to Greece. And then there's the coordination agreement that Europe has within its countries. So that's a different way that the workers are protected, and they can work in different places and be protected despite moving from one European country to the other. And I see one more hand that is raised.
Thank you. For me, I just wanted to respond to the question, or the first question that was being discussed here. I think for me, if I was a policymaker, I would consider social security, like agreements with countries like within the SADC for Zimbabwe, because mainly looking at our migration flows, you see there are high numbers that are going to South Africa and other SADC countries. And this would actually enhance their protection and also assist them when they are coming back, because I've seen they really do struggle in terms of returning home and wanting to access their benefits from those other countries that they would have spent many of their years laboring in, and hence when they come back, it's a struggle. and West, our economy is still developing, and for them to be then covered in these other social security schemes back home, it can be a challenge. So it would be good to consider social security agreements with South Africa, and then secondly with Europe, because we also have high migrant workers who are going to Europe, so it will go a long way in enhancing their protection and also having them being able to participate in the development of the country back home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for there's been many responses. I'm very happy. It means that we're all waking up. That's good. There's somebody else that wants to say something? No? Okay. So I'll move to the next slide. And when we talk about Social Security agreements, there's two options that we normally refer to. There is the coordination of the systems and the harmonization of the systems. We know that each country has its own Social Security system, ruled by its own rules. So each country defines how Social Security is going to work within the limits of the country, correct? So with that in mind, we have two options when we sign an agreement. We can either coordinate or we can harmonize. When we coordinate, yes? Okay, so when we coordinate, what we are doing is we're basically establishing bridges between the countries. We create procedures that will help people benefit from the Social Security systems of both countries while respecting their own legislation. They don't need to change anything within the internal legislation. What we do is we build the two bridges to connect them so that people can use them to benefit. On the other hand, when we talk about harmonization, what we're saying is that we're going to have the same system for all. So if we're talking of two countries, then it's either one adopts the system of the other, or they together create a new system. As you can imagine, harmonizing, it's a lot more complex than coordinating Social Security systems, because it means a complete change of the system that exists in one or both or all the countries that are involved in this negotiation. So as it said here, what coordination does, it ensures that migrant workers and their families can transfer, maintain, and receive their social protection entitlements or benefits from each country when they move from one country to the other. When we talk about harmonization, what we're saying is that the rights and the benefits are the same, regardless of the country where they are. When we talk about coordination, as I said before, we create these bridges. We create the administrative links between different Social Security systems. For example, for a multilateral agreement, where one harmonizes, when we create a new legislation, it's very difficult. Everybody needs to change, or everybody needs to adapt the legislation of one of the countries. And this is, as you can imagine, very, very, very difficult. Therefore, when we talk about Social Security agreements, what we normally refer to is coordination. We talk about systems that remain as they are and connect. Because, as I said before, when we talk about harmonizing, what we're talking about is a complete change of the legislation, at least of one of the parties. And this, theoretically, this can be done, but in practice, it's very difficult. Is this clear? Because this is key for what we're going to discuss in the next few slides. Anybody has a question?
Mine is not really a question, it's an affirmation of what you said. We have a lot of people can do case studies with a lot of countries that already have this bilateral or multilateral agreement, but whether they are respecting it is another issue, really. It's another. You know, they are there on paper. Well, I wait to hear what you are presenting. They are there on paper in theory, with the legally binding instruments, with the legal international conventions, all there is, with all the agreements, yet actualizing them, implementing them, you've already begun to hint that it's an enormous challenge that we have been grappling with, I'm sure, since the 1960s till now.
Yes, yes, it's something that we will see in the next slide and that we will see more in depth in the next meeting on Thursday. But yes, there's what I can say now is that there's the agreement and then there's the implementation of the agreement. And there's two different things and they rely on very different things. There's an agreement that can be signed and never be implemented. And there's agreements that are signed and implemented. And there's different reasons why, and there's different things that need to happen for this to actually be implemented. Anybody else that has a question about this? No, we're okay. Okay, so at any given time, you can stop.
Sorry, I was just saying, it looks like we are. There's no more movement in the chat either. So please feel free to continue.
Okay, so at any given time, feel free to stop me and ask questions. So we were saying that we have basically, when we talk about agreements, we have two options. We have a bilateral social security agreement or a multilateral social security agreement. When we talk about multilateral social security agreements, we can refer to two types of agreements. A regional agreement, that is to say, a group of countries that are linked either by geographical reasons or mostly by geographical reasons. And then a multilateral social security agreement that can involve countries that are not at all close, not at all related by geography, but that decide that they want to have, for whatever reason, an agreement to link them all together. So the difference is, when we talk about bilateral social security agreements, it has to be two parties, two countries that are involved. When we talk about multilateral social security agreements, we know that is at least three. And then from 3 to whatever number you can think of. Then what happens when we have bilateral social security agreements is that each agreement, it's a universe in itself. So whatever is agreed in one agreement does not have to be replicated on the next agreement. So I told you that I'm from Argentina. And let's say that Argentina signs an agreement with Cameroon. And then Argentina decides to sign an agreement with Ethiopia. The fact that I signed already an agreement with Cameroon doesn't mean that what I agree with Ethiopia is going to be the same. So we can find situations where a migrant worker from Argentina that goes to Cameroon has a different set of rights than a migrant worker that goes from Argentina to Ethiopia. Now, on the other side, when we talk about multilateral social security agreements, we have a group of countries that are linked to the same agreement and therefore have the same set of rules and rights. So this applies to all of them. We would have this coherence between all the countries that we don't see when we have a bilateral agreement. We can't see it. It sometimes is that the text of the agreement is very similar from one to the other, but it can be that they're not. So we're not as sure. Now, on the other side, and this you know by life experience, when you need to conclude an agreement with one person, it's usually easier than when you need to conclude an agreement with multiple persons. Well, this is the same. When you need to conclude an agreement with one country, it's usually easier than when you need to conclude an agreement with multiple countries because there's different opinions, because there's different persons intervening, there's different points of view. So usually concluding an agreement with just one party is easier. And it can be a first step into an eventual multilateral agreement. Now, sometimes these bilateral and multilateral agreements coexist. So we can have, for example, an agreement between Argentina and Brazil, but we can also have an agreement of the Americas. It doesn't exist. I'm just giving you an example. So the agreement between Argentina and Brazil would overlap with the agreement, the regional agreements of the Americas. And this can be, and this can happen. Now there's different options. Some agreements will say that this cannot happen. So if there's a multilateral agreement, it supersedes any bilateral agreement. And there also can be that the multilateral agreement says that it supersedes the bilateral agreement only if the clauses that are in the multilateral agreement are more beneficial, are better than the clauses that the bilateral social security agreement has. So if the clauses on the bilateral agreement are better, are more beneficial for the population, that is the one that would benefit, that would prime in the relationship between the two countries. So once again, going back to the example of Brazil and Argentina, if we had a clause in the agreement of Brazil and Argentina that it's more beneficial than the clause of the multilateral agreement for the Americas that we referred to before, then specifically for Argentina and Brazil, the more beneficial clause would be valid, and everything else would be valid from the regional agreement. But for other countries in the Americas, this wouldn't apply. This is only for the two that signed the bilateral agreement. Is this clear?
These are technicalities, exactly. You begin to understand, yes, it's, at least for me, it's beginning to be clearer now, yeah.
Okay, good. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. As I said before, there's other issues. Yeah.
Whether these agreements are strictly limited to migrants, can it be economical, political?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of kinds of agreements. In this meeting, we will refer only to the social security agreements, but it can be labor.
Okay, in our context, it is limited to social security agreements, yeah, in our context.
Yes, in our context, we're just going to refer to that, but there can be labor agreements, there can be finance agreements, economic agreements, development agreements. There's different kinds. Actually, when you think about even when you think about multilateral agreements and you think about regional agreements, the social security agreement can be a part or cannot be a part. It can be the start or can come at the end. It's not mandatory to have it. But for example, when you're talking about free movement between countries, free movement is usually followed by an agreement on social security rights, because you have people moving from one place to the other and you want their social security rights to be able to follow them. Okay, but it doesn't mean that when there's a labor agreement or a free movement agreement, there is a social security agreement. It's just that it's encouraged so that people move and their rights follow them. Yes, Nicoleta.
Okay. What is the difference between portability and totalization? And what kind of agreement is necessary for one and another one?
Okay, you're moving way into the slides. We will get into that.
Okay.
Yes, we will get into that. We will get into that. But I'm going to respond in easy and quickly. When you talk about portability, it means that you take your rights wherever you go. When you talk about totalization, what you're referring to is that some countries have qualifying conditions. That is to say, a country to trigger pension, you need to have worked at least 20 years. And you have worked in two different countries. You worked 15 years in country A and 5 years in country B. So country A wants you to have 20 years to access your pension, but you only have 15. So what totalization allows is that if there's an agreement signed and their totalization is included, you get to take those 5 countries from country B, those 5 years from country B, and add them to the 15 that you have to actually trigger the clause and reach the qualifying conditions. Is that clear? We will get into more details later, but is it clear for now? Nicoleta?
Nicoleta, if you're confirming, you're muted, so you can let us know if that's clear, either with the chat or turning on your camera and waving. Or we can continue, and then if there's further questions, we can come back.
Okay, yeah, Nicoleta, if you want to ask later, just feel free to do so. So, taking from what was said before, the success of any of these types of agreements is not so much on arriving to an agreement and signing. It will rely on the effective collaboration and exchange of information between the countries, the social security institutions that are involved, and their administrative and management capacities. So, as I said before, and as one of you asked, there's a difference between signing and implementing. And the implementation heavily relies on collaboration between the countries, because we're going to need information that will have to move from one to the other. Now, when we're talking about a social security agreement, we would normally talk about 4 principles: equality of treatment, exportability, determination of applicable legislation, and maintenance of benefits, totalization. And then a 5th principle is the administrative assistance. When we talk about equality of treatment, and this was something that was referred to at the very beginning, we will talk about migrant workers enjoying the same provisions that local workers receive. So the principle of equality of treatment refers to the principle that all workers engaged in remunerated labor should enjoy equal provisions of social security. Now, the exportability, this we're referring to payment of the benefits abroad. So the exportability is also known as payment of benefits abroad, is the portability principle that provides for any acquired rights or right in the course of acquisition to be guaranteed to the migrant worker in the territory of the other state. Therefore, what we're talking about in simple, to make it clear, is the ability to receive a pension even if you move to another country, or to take whatever you have contributed when you move. Then we talk about the determination of applicable legislation. Now, you remember when I was talking about the legislation of Social Security, I referred to the legislation of each of the countries. Now, the question is, what legislation would apply to me if I'm Argentinian and I move to Brazil? Would it be the legislation from Argentina? Would it be the legislation from Brazil? Would it be both? So to put it more on a case, if I work in Argentina and I move to Brazil, do I contribute to the Social Security of Argentina? Do I contribute to the Social Security of Brazil? Or do I contribute to both?
To depend on the, yes, both, and it will depend on the bilateral or agreement both countries have. Directly or indirectly, yes, you are contributing. By the fact that you are present in Brazil, you are contributing to the economy. And when your portability, I don't know, I was going to clarify that, but you explained exportability is the same as portability, right? When your social security income will be sent back to Argentina on your return, definitely you are also contributing to the Argentinian economy. So depending on the agreement, in some cases, even without the agreement, definitely you are contributing to, because also if you are in Brazil and you are sending remittances back to Argentina, you are contributing to the economy of Argentina in those instances.
Yes. In terms of finance, it's true. But in terms of contribution of Social Security, where a part of your salary is derived to pay for Social Security benefits, where would it be? Would it be in Argentina or would it be in Brazil? I see a hand raised from Mesfin.
Yeah, actually, I do have an idea. It is based on the country of origin or the country of destination. The government social protection coverage matters. For example, if I am eligible for the social security coverage in the Argentina and I move to Brazil, so when I move to Brazil, if the government still allows for me the eligibility for social security protection coverage, when I return back, I don't worry for that. So when I go to destination country like Brazil, it's based on the agreement between the two countries. At the same time, it also based on the legal frameworks, universal legal frameworks, like Universal Human Declaration and other ILO and other treaties. So in that, social protection is the human rights. So the destination country has to respect this and provide for me the social protection for me. So if my contribute in their agreements, if they agreed when my contribution is still there when I'm in the destination country, still again I'm eligible for the social protection coverage in my country of origin, even when I return back. At the same time, if I'm paying the tax and my contribution is still well in the destination country, still I'm eligible for social protection. This is my concern. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So to synthesize, I would say that what we're referring to when we talk about the determination of applicable legislation is whether we would have to contribute in Brazil, in Argentina, or in both. In principle, we would contribute only in the place where we work. So when I move to Brazil, I would start contributing in Brazil and stop contributing in Argentina. Now, there's a few exceptions to that we will be seeing that are also agreed when, or in most cases, when we talk about social security agreements. So keep in mind, when we move from one legislation to the other, and we move permanently, we stop contributing to the country of origin, and we start contributing to the country of destination as a principle. These have exceptions, but as a principle, this is what would happen. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we don't have to, we might want to, but we don't have to contribute to both legislations. And then the maintenance of benefits is the totalization that I just now referred about, and is the principle that allows you to access two different histories, labor histories in two different countries to be able to trigger the conditions to acquire a benefit. I see Victor saying something. My reflection is that the more the bilateral agreements, the more the migration challenges. Directly or indirectly, I see connections between economic, social, and political agreements, but there are situations where one can contribute to both origin and destination. Yes. So I'll respond to each one of the points. Yes, the more bilateral agreements, the more challenges, but also the more benefits. If there's no agreements, people cannot access their benefits or have a much harder time accessing their benefits. So it is true, while it is true that if there's too many bilateral agreements, it brings different challenges. I would always opt to have too many than to have none. Directly or indirectly, I see connections between economic, social, and political agreements. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's different reasons why a country would go for an agreement with another country. And these can be any of the three that you related to and more. So a country can choose to have an agreement for investment reasons. A country can choose to have an agreement for regional reasons. A country can choose to have an agreement for political reasons. So there's different situations why a country would start conversations to start a negotiation of a social security agreement. And then, yes, this is why I clarified that there's a difference between having to contribute and wanting to contribute. There's situations where you can contribute to both, one mandatory and one by choice. And there's situations that we will see later where even if you move, you don't contribute to that country because you move for a very short period of time. And countries want you to have one history of contributions in only one country to make it easier for you, going back to the challenges of the many bilateral agreements. So yes, there's an exception to that. And yes, you can still contribute to both. If you want, there's a lot of countries that allow for voluntary contributions, even when you're not residing in that country. And then what I was saying before about the administrative assistance, this is one of the main principles that goes or complements these four principles. And it's the only way where Social Security agreement that has been agreed, that has been signed, that is in place can be enforced. Now, there's different references and resources. I told you that there's no one template that we can use for the agreement. There's not one template that we can say, this is the agreement, let's just sign it, and both countries decide to sign, and that's it. This is a negotiation. This is an agreement between two countries on different clauses, on the things that can be included or cannot be included in the agreement, the length of the agreement, the extent of the agreement. But there is a model. There is a model that was done that we can find if we look into the conventions and recommendations of the ILO. There's a convention 157 on maintenance of social security rights that is from 1982. But as you see, it was only signed by 5 countries. Out of the whole countries of the ILO, only 5 signed it. And then there's another one, it's a recommendation, but it's a completely different thing, where you have the actual text, the actual model of an agreement. That is recommendation 167. Also complementing this convention is about the maintenance of social security rights. It's from 1983, so 1 year after the convention. And it comes with the model, as I said, for the conclusion of bilateral or multilateral social security agreements. What you can do if you're interested is once we're done with today's meeting or Thursday's meeting, you can go into the ILO webpage and look for the ILO conventions and the ILO recommendations. And then you will find these 2 texts that will serve as a base, in many cases, for the text that will be discussed in a social security agreement. Now, let's go deep into the agreement. When we talk about the agreements, we would normally find these few things that will show in any kind of agreement, in any agreement that we see. First, we will have the legislative scope, which means what are the legislations that will be included in this agreement? What are the branches of Social Security that will be included in this agreement? Then we will have the personal scope, which are the persons that will be included in this agreement. Then, as we mentioned before, there will be a clause specifically referring to the equality of treatment. There will be another clause that will be referring specifically about the export of benefits, the payment of benefits abroad. And there will be a whole section on definitions. Why? because countries don't call things the same. And we also need to determine different things for each of the countries. So there will be a definition that will include the legislation. What is the legislation that is to be considered? There will be a definition concerning the competent authorities and institutions. There will be a definition indicating what is concerned, what is conceived as the benefit, or what is understood as entrance period. And again, these are some examples, and it's not set in stone. We can have many different definitions, sometimes a lot, sometimes less. This will depend on the agreement that is signed and the parties involved, how lengthy they like their agreements to be. Now, the first one that I referred to was the material scope. This is the legislation that will be included in the agreement. So one of the clauses of the agreement will say the legislation that is included in the agreement is. And then we can have two options, as you will see in the second bullet. It can say the legislation that we consider is law number 5, law number 10, law number 15, decrees 20, 15, and 25. Or we can have a clause saying the laws that are involved are the laws of old age and pensions. Now, there's another option that we can find in these kinds of agreements, and is when it's referred more generically and say, this agreement includes the legislation and the laws, regulations, and decrees regarding old age and pensions. I saw there was a hand raised. There's
no longer at the moment, but
I see Victor asked a question. Are these strictly legal matters? Yes, when we talk about legislative or material scope, we're going to be referring specifically to the laws governing the benefits or whatever we want to include in this agreement. Now, why would we choose one or the other? Now, we haven't seen it yet, but after the agreement has been negotiated, it has to follow a process that will make it then binding, that will make it then enforced. Once all this process is done, it's only when the agreement starts to be used. And this is a lengthy process, it's a complex process. So in my opinion, when I was negotiating agreements, I would normally try to be more generical, because if we list the laws specifically and then the laws change, we need to modify the agreement. So we need to redo all the lengthy and complex process that we did before to change the number of the law, the name of the law. While if we're referring to a more generical laws, regulations, and decrees regarding old age and pensions, we don't have to. We only need to inform the other party that there's been a change in the legislation and provide the information on that change. So there's two different options. There's no right and wrong. What I'm giving you now is based on my experience, what I used to do. Any questions on these?
Mine is not a question, it's a reaction. I begin to see really, as I presume you are a lawyer, I begin to see really why there's enormous challenges that are involved in really implementing some of these agreements. You know, it is really, for example, a country changes the constitution. You have a 1991 constitution, for example, and you change your constitution in 2022 or 2021, it affects the whole, all these technicalities. You begin to appreciate also more. At some point, you are frustrated, but again, you begin to appreciate the delay. It involves a lot of technicalities.
Yes, yes, it involves a lot of technicalities. So this is why it's important to really understand what we're talking about when we're talking about these kinds of agreements. Now, this is an example. that I wanted to show you. This is a real life example from the agreement between India and France. And it says Article 2, legislative scope. This agreement shall apply as regards to France to the legislation that determines the general organization of social security schemes under mentioned in as much as pension and invalidity assurance are concerned. And then it says to the legislation regarding to, and it names a couple of sectors that are included. And then it also says to the invalidity insurance, including survivor's pension, applicable to the persons referred to in the paragraph above. And then with regards to India, it says to all legislations concerning old age and survivor's pensions for employed persons and the permanent total disability pension for employed persons. As you see, the way they refer to their own legislations is different, but they're both valid. And the details that they put into this agreement, it's also agreed by the parties. It can be very lengthy, it can be very short, it can be with numbers, it can be without numbers. Each country decides what they want to include, and it's in the other country to accept this or request a change or agree on something completely different. So there's a second point that says this agreement should also apply to all legislations which will amend or extend the legislation specified in paragraph 1 of this article. So this is a safe clause saying if we have a change in the legislation, regardless of the change, because we're not referring to specific numbers, we will still apply this agreement. I see there was someone on the chat. How easy is it for migrant workers low qualified to interpret these social security agreements and be able to benefit from such agreements? It's not easy. This is why the institutions play a key role on promoting these agreements, on informing about these benefits. But we will see that next Thursday when we talk about the actual implementation of the agreements. This is very difficult even for someone that understands the legislation. So for a low-skilled worker, it's very, very difficult to understand. And they need someone that will explain this to them, someone that has sort of digest all of this information and can provide it in a simpler way. But this is the normal case when we talk about any contract or any agreement. It's usually complicated legal terms that very few people understand. And then this needs to be interpreted for the general population because it's so complex. This is the same. It's not different from this situation. This is a complex agreement that is negotiated, that is investigated, that is supervised, that has to go through a lot of stages to actually be implemented. And because countries try to be very lengthy, sometimes it becomes very complex in the text itself. And this is why it's important to have someone that will then translate this into a simpler, much, much simpler way for people to understand. And not even just low-skilled employees. Oftentimes, high-skilled employees don't understand what we're referring to when we have an agreement like this. Exactly, just like I'm doing now, trying to translate this into simpler words. And then if we look into clause C, it says this agreement shall not apply to legislations that establish a new social security branch unless the competent authorities of the contracting states agree on this application. So, for example, we have a country where the only social security benefit is pensions. And they introduce a new social security benefit, the unemployment insurance. Now, what this agreement says is that this new benefit, the social insurance for the unemployment, will not automatically come into this agreement. It will stay outside unless the parties that are involved in this negotiation, that are involved in this agreement, decide so specifically. So they need to agree on the application of this new benefit. And I think for now, we've covered the hour and a half. I don't know, Michela, how you want to continue. Should we stop here? Should we continue a little more?
Thank you, Mariano. I would say, if that's okay with you, we can stop here unless there are any pressing questions, which we're happy to take if that's the case. We can have a few minutes for questions. I wouldn't open a new chapter, perhaps, of the discussion. I would leave that for the second session on Thursday. But if there are any questions that are, or comments or reactions, reflections that are linked to what has been discussed up until now, we're happy to stay a few more minutes.
Just maybe a final comment. I was going to ask, with these BRICS, you are hearing of BRICS. You are in that region. You belong to Argentina. How does it apply in this case? You know, it's a trend that is coming. How would you connect? How is it connected to what we are discussing? Are there any connections? Are there any benefits? What are the implications regarding in this context that we are discussing? This negotiation that is Uganda, South Africa, for example, from the African perspective, wants to join them. What will be the implications in connection to what we are discussing?
Okay, so the BRICS is the union of countries for different topics. The BRICS decided to get together and agree on several things. One of them being economic measures, one of them being promotion of certain benefits, promotion of qualifications, different things. Now, there's no social security agreement for the BRICS. So nothing that I've explained applies to the BRICS as a whole. There's social security agreements within or for some of the countries in the BRICS countries, but there's not agreement. There's no regional or a multilateral agreement for the BRICS. So nothing that I've explained would apply directly to all the BRICS. On the other hand, when we refer to Mercosur, which is the union of the countries of Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, and Paraguay, it started as a similar situation. The countries got together, decided to have free movement, decided to have a lot of benefits in between, decided to do investments together, decided on a certain set of things. And then as a second step came the Social Security Agreement. And then that was signed and then implemented. But the fact that there's a union of countries like the BRICS doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a Social Security Agreement following it.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Thank you. If yes, Tupao, please.
Sorry, I was falling asleep. But what caught my attention is when you were talking about the bilateral and multilateral agreements. I'm from Tonga's labor sending unit in the welfare department, and one of the most pressing issue here in Tonga is the social issues of that impacted the workers in the labor mobility scheme. And when you were talking about these agreements, it's wonderful to hear that it's been confirmed that it works. You've done the research and the theories, and that's something that my government should consider when discussing the policies and improving the services that they provide to support the workers. And that's just my comment on what you were discussing, Mariano. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's important for countries to incentivize the formalization within the country, within their borders. And sometimes this is one of the ways that can be done.
Exactly. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I don't see any other raised hands or open microphones and nothing additional in the chat. So let me, first of all, thank you very much. All the participants, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for your patience with the little hiccup that we had at the beginning with the link not working, and we were fortunately able to fix it in time. So thank you very much for your patience with us, and thank you, Mariana, also for connecting today and leading us through this session. And thank you for making yourself available this week. We will see you again, as we mentioned, next Thursday at the same time, so 12 noon Central European time. You will receive a notification with the link to join. Hopefully the right one this time. And thank you once again, and we will see you in a couple of days.
Okay.
Thank you all, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.